So welcome to our Tuesday, February 28th community call with the Cal Poly University sustainability study. There's a research team here that's been working with us for several months to study business models of retreat centers, looking at floor plans, looking at programs, looking at all the different ways that retreat centers are structured. And as you know, retreat centers are very unique and complicated and challenging and have all different kinds of histories and locations and markets. And it's a fascinating thing to be studying and often confusing and complex. So I'm really glad that we have a team helping us do that. And the focus of our call today is to go over what the team has learned so far. I'll be introducing them in a second. And for them to kind of share a deck and talk about what they're looking at, and then to get some feedback from you all about what you're hearing, if that rings true for your experience, and maybe some discussion about where we hope the study will go moving forward. And we'll do another community call in May with this same group, talking about where the study has gone since today. So this is kind of a check-in along the way, and we're on a journey together. So I'm excited to have this dialogue that's sort of like the RCC in general. It's like shaping itself as it goes. It's this emergent process. So that's very appropriate for what we do here. If you haven't been on a community call before, these are peer-oriented spaces for us to be with each other at retreat centers across the United States and Canada, to share insights and best practices, build relationships, and potentially move toward collaborative projects of various kinds. In some ways, this project is a collaborative project because we have 8 retreat centers in the RCC who are participating and contributing data that's helping to make this project possible. So my name is Ben. I'm the program manager for the Retreat Center Collaboration. And we have here Yumi, Alyza, and Jenna from the Cal Poly University team. Erin McCauley is also here from RCC, who's taking notes and recording video. And then we have all the rest of us here at retreat centers. I think before I pass it over to the team, I always like to do a little invitation for an introduction in the chat. It just kind of helps everybody here know who else is in the room. And sometimes there are people in the room that you forgot you already know until you see their chat. So to encourage folks to drop that in, drop in your name, drop in where you're coming from, maybe a reflective word about kind of the headspace you're in coming in. Yeah, that's a great lead, Pam. That's perfect. So if you want to drop in just a little note about yourself, I'm going to do that as well here for a second. Yeah, great. We have people kind of from all sides of the equation here on the call, which is really helpful to think about. How could this study benefit all of us in different ways? What are the things that we are hoping to get out of a study like this? How are our needs similar? How are our needs unique? So I will pass it over to Yumi, Alyza, and Jenna. Jenna, I'm not sure who wants to speak first, but I'll just pass it over to you as a team to do some introductions and help us know a little bit more about you.
All right, I guess we can share our slides because we do have introductions in the slides as well, just we can go through that. As well as here's a link to a copy that you can view in case you need to do that for any reason. You can follow along on your own device.
All right, so I'll just start us off. So yeah, our project is named the Retreat Center Collaboration Cost Analysis, and we're focusing on sustainability. As you all know, and we'll go into a little bit. So our agenda, So first off, we're gonna do our project presentation. We're just gonna review, kind of the all the research we did last quarter and just kind of our general ideas, and we'll bring it forward, and then gonna go on to a Q&A. We'll talk with you, see what you're thinking, what we can learn from your experiences. Then gonna go on to a multi-criteria decision analysis overview, and we'll get more into what that means later. And then we'll have a discussion about that, another Q&A, and then we'll do a wrap up. So Cal Poly team introductions. We have Alyza Jose. I don't know if we want to each speak to our own or not.
Yeah,
So
yeah, my name's Alyza Jose, and I'm a third-year transfer student studying industrial engineering, and I'm just very excited to be here with you guys.
And then there's me, Jenna Vokolek. I use they them pronouns, and I am a fourth-year manufacturing engineering student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I'm also very excited to be here.
Hello, my name is Yumi Aguilar. I'm a fifth-year industrial engineering student. I'm also very excited to be here. And then someone else we'd like to shout out, Dr. Tali Fried, our advisor, project advisor. She cannot be here today, but she's been the one kind of advising us as we go through this project on the faculty end. All right, so just to start with a quick overview of the project, we're currently working with 8 centers, which are providing us data across the US and Canada. And the centers across the network have a very large spread of religious affiliations. And from a survey that Ben sent us, we found that the top 5 religious affiliations across the RCC were as follows: Catholic, spiritual seekers, contemplative traditions, other Christian, and multi-faith. Centers have also identified themselves as no affiliation, showing that there are no structural religious affiliations within their programming. We found that the centers that we are working with actually have a pretty decent spread across these affiliations, which is great for us as it allows us to make sure that we have all this in mind as a representative of the full network. As well as due to the pandemic, many centers shifted to day retreats or virtual programming, but for the scope of this project, we'll be focusing specifically on in-person centers that provide overnight stays. Next slide, please. Last academic quarter, so I guess that would be from September through December, we worked on a research and literature review, which covered 3 major topics. I'm going to be covering the wellness tourism industry as well as just the retreat center industry. So we're defining wellness tourism as travel associated with the pursuit of maintaining or enhancing one's well-being. And this industry we found is actually a global market with many different sectors, including things like cruises, resorts, yoga, meditation studios, and most importantly for this project, retreat centers. A study from the Global Wellness Institute reported very significant growth between 2012 and 2017 within the market. However, due to the pandemic, there was a huge loss of 11% during 2020, due to the fact that many of these sectors were being limited due to limitations that were existing across the globe. However, there's a projected growth of 9.8% over the next year. However, this project focuses specifically on the retreat center sector. And retreat centers are characterized by the prioritization of well-being of the mind, body, and spirit with a big focus on spiritual healing. We are defining spiritual healing as the path that one takes and the resources that are provided to promote spiritual wellness and transformation within an individual and community. Retreat centers commonly provide programs to promote spiritual healing and supplement this with various amenities like food, lodging, as well as the physical space being utilized. And something huge to note from this research is that retreat centers are very different from resorts, as resorts focus on rest and leisure, while retreat centers really focus on that wellness, healing, and transformation area.
All right, and then so I'll be talking about the sustainable cost models and nonprofits and the kind of research we did on that. So in a retreat center, a sustainable cost model looks like you're optimizing the available resources such as the usage of all the space, retreat center zone, and the optimization of all the staff / volunteers to serve the greater vision. So to achieve that, resource assessment can be done to fully understand the resources at hand that can lead to earning revenue. But due to the non-concrete outputs of retreat centers, such as relaxation or spiritual healing, accurate financial analysis does prove to be complex. For nonprofit organizations as a whole, there are typically 3 points of view to evaluate the performance, which are economics, efficiency, and effectiveness. So economics is attempting to minimize the inputs in the system, such as the resource consumption, as you were talking about earlier. Efficiency is the balance between the uses of the resources, which are the inputs, and the results, which are the outputs. And then effectiveness is the comparison of the outputs in the context of the objectives that are being sought out, like in terms of like the mission, right? And then blended value accounting, or otherwise known as triple bottom line, which is, you hear that a lot, can be used to measure the monetary, social, and economic output, as well as the impact generated by retreat centers to find the best way for retreat centers to be sustainable. So that's, very much in our studies, we're not just looking at the financials, but also what are the impacts that the retreat centers are putting out, because that's at the core of it. That's what's the most important to keep going, right? Trying to be sustainable so the mission can continue. And so blended value accounting can help drive decisions for retreat centers by directly comparing the social and the economic impact of decisions. And then cross subsidization is the idea of doing some things that aren't 100% in line with the mission to help financially support the less quote unquote profitable ventures that are crucial to the mission. So, some things we've been throwing around and hearing, doing corporate retreats so you can pay for, your more mission driven programs that might not be as financially self-supported. And then just according to the survey that RCC has conducted of centers in the network, we've heard that the factors influencing the financial sustainability of the retreat centers are low attendance, recovering from closure losses, limits to the size of groups, rising cost of food, supplies, and amenities, the aging out of staff, the leadership and donors, and then labor shortages. And some of the positive factors we heard are donations and grants and expanded programming.
All right, I'll be talking about operations management in the context of retreat centers. So it is essentially, it means maintaining and keeping the facilities running. Different variables such as costs, revenues, programs, and services offered, services provided help contribute to the operations of a retreat center. But one of the main challenges our team is focused on concerns financial feasibility and asking which of these variables a retreat center must prioritize in order to break even and be sustainable. So when brainstorming possible costs of not meeting the break-even point for most centers, we've identified elements such as shortage of employees and a change in the market or group of people to whom a center can offer their services or programs to. In addition, true costs are often unknown. For example, despite having high-resolution data, it's often difficult for the finance team to distinguish which factors or essential features are contributing to the operating expenses. And finally, there's still no current standard model for identifying true costs, which will be an important component of our study. So this is our problem statement. And as we mentioned earlier, each retreat center has its unique mission, and something that we recognize based on our in-person and virtual visits in the past few months is the common denominator of providing a place and the resources for spiritual transformation or spiritual healing. And due to the lack of infrastructure that promotes financial feasibility, the study will be composed of identifying the most influential variables that impact the retreat center's financial performance and sustainability. And ultimately, the goal is to help mission-driven retreat centers be sustainable and provide leaders with valuable information that they can use to make important decisions.
All right, moving on to performance metrics. These are the, metrics that we're going to be using to see if our, we're creating a calculator tool, whatever, that will be doing actual good. So we have, first off, client satisfaction. So that's satisfaction of retreat centers and utilizing the tools given to them to make their center sustainable. Financial status, that the revenue is greater than or equal to expenses, allowing for some money to be put aside for larger projects or unexpected hurdles. process improvement, so time saved for retreat centers employees to produce the same or better results at their retreat centers by use of the calculator and our suggestions that we developed, and accuracy of planning increased for retreat centers due to the decisions being data driven. And then amount of loss, we want to minimize retreat center losses by finding areas of operation that are creating financial loss and finding ways to make them break even, or find other operations that can cover the loss.
So in our study, we often emphasize that each retreat center is different and each has its mission and unique programs to offer. And after spending time cleaning and sorting the data, we can conclude that payroll contributes the most to the operating expenses. And we understand that this is something that we have no control over changing, so we need to exclude payroll in the next steps of our analysis. Other major factors that contribute to costs are listed in the slide, such as maintenance, housekeeping, and groundskeeping. And on the other hand, revenues are mostly composed of programming fees and charitable contributions, and if applicable, renting good spaces. So as we go deeper into our analysis, we also hope to dive deep into other factors such as occupancy levels. And as mentioned earlier, we want to do a more robust analysis, excluding payroll.
All right, so then we have our solution directions for our true cost calculator. So we came up with 3 levels of sophistication as the manual, the semi-automatic, and automatic, and each of us will talk a little bit more about those.
Can I interrupt for a second? Jenna, can you just frame the calculator tool a little bit so that we know kind of what you're shooting toward?
Yeah, so the calculator tool is kind of it's a model we're going to come up with that will, retreat centers data are going to input their data, whatever way that will be, which is the 3 levels of sophistication. And the calculator tool will kind of highlight I guess, like the weaker spots or whatever, like the spots that are losing the retreat center money and kind of the ones that are doing well, and then take the output from the calculator and then use it to apply to our best practices manual, which we will talk a little bit more about later. Hopefully that clears things up a little bit.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Next slide. So yeah, talking a little bit more about the manual level of sophistication for the calculator tool. So the manual would just be your manually inputting data into text boxes. It's very, as the name suggests, manual. So the tool will have text boxes for each factor. So food costs, rent for land, size of staff, etc. And you just put in the data. The benefit of that is that it is theoretically less error because actual human person is putting in the information, so it should be more accurate. But then drawbacks is if you want to do multiple runs through the data, if small things change and you want to run it again, with the manual one, it's a lot harder, which runs into time. It's the most time consuming out of all of them because you have to be writing it every single time that you run it through, and it can't be able to work smoothly with a previously organized data such as a spreadsheet or credit card statements. Move on to semi-automatic.
Right, so for this semi-automatic level of sophistication, it's kind of acts as a middle ground between the manual and automatic versions. Rather than inputting each area manually, instead it will take in a file input, such as an Excel workbook. We would end up providing a template file to each retreat center in order for them to fill in their revenue and expenses, and that template file will contain common or higher level categories, for example, things like donations or contributions, payroll, maintenance, etc. Some benefits of this tool is that it requires way less manual inputs than the manual version, as well as requiring less technological literacy, as you'll see later that the automatic solution may require. This also acts as both a data organizer and a calculator tool, as you'll be able to use the template file to at least see each area of cost or revenue and that amount. Some drawbacks of this version, however, are that it would require potentially a new form of data organization for each center. Otherwise, you may have to actually end up copying over financial information from your current cost documentation system, which could end up taking more time than we may anticipate. Furthermore, individual centers may end up having different cost or revenue categories that we may not be able to account for in the common or higher level categories in the template. We will be trying to mitigate this as much as possible, but of course, there's always circumstances that may end up going outside of what we are expecting.
So for the automatic solution, the main goal is to automatically capture data through credit card transactions or retreat center bookings, which will then go into a database. We are faced with an optimization problem where we want to maximize revenues and minimize costs to break even and ultimately determine the retreat center's financial feasibility. So when developing the automatic tool, each retreat center will be given its 9-digit identifier because the model will vary per site due to the different programs and services offered. And just some of the benefits of this are that it's fast, it's most streamlined, and you get the optimal values as soon as possible, and it requires very minimal human effort. And unfortunately, due to the nature of the program, the employee in charge must be comfortable with technology and debugging potential defects that come naturally with programming.
Right, so something that will be going hand in hand with this calculator tool is the thing we're calling the best practices manual or analysis. And this is kind of a way for us to allow to analyze qualitative things in each center that may not be able to be kind of expressed through numbers or financial data. So this is really a look into some questions such as, is there an optimal number of beds or services a retreat center should provide in order to be sustainable? How does a retreat center market to the younger generation? Is it worthwhile to look at offering retreats to corporate entities? And one of the main ones looking at is how do centers maintain their values while also being sustainable? So that's looking into the mission statements, the values that you'd find on your website, and just your drive and your vision. How does that work in terms of also being sustainable? And finally, is there a one-size-fits-all model that all retreat centers can follow? And this is something that that may be very difficult to look into as we've been emphasizing throughout this presentation, that retreat centers, all of them have very different visions, have very different situations. So this answer may be no, and that's okay. And that's kind of the purpose of having this kind of best practices manual, have various different options that retreat centers can look like. And so another way to look at it is that if another retreat center were to open, or if you were to restart, this is something that you can look at in order to build from the ground up and build a good foundation. And these are just some of our references from our research and review. And I guess we'll move on to a Q&A. If that slide is here. Yeah. I'd just love to open it up for any of your thoughts.
Maybe do you want to stop screen sharing for a few minutes and we can just kind of dig into all that you've shared? There's a lot of information there. How is this landing for folks?
I think it looks awesome.
Right on. All set. Well, thanks for being here.
Well, no, we've been trying to do functional accounting, if you will, breaking down the costs and the revenue attached to the different aspects of our operation. So having something to benchmark against would be really interesting. And I also think, down the line, if we could get to looking at staffing models, because I think that's going to be the next step for looking at functionally how do we build our financial model.
I agree with what's being said. This is Kathleen from the Christine Center in Willard. We recently had a consultation. We got a grant for a pricing model because we rent rooms. And my background's in finance and marketing, but sometimes you need to bring in a consultant to show the board what you already know sometimes. So that's been helpful, but sustainability is a big issue. And just in terms of relevance too, you know, are your programs relevant to what people need today? I mean, we can do surveys up the wazoo, but if attendance is down, and it has been since COVID, I mean, we had to close and people are trickling back, but it's not producing the kind of revenue we need to really continue to be sustainable. We're not closing or anything, but it's a big worry for me for sure. So thank you for doing this. It's perfectly stated, the purpose of this. I love it.
So I'm Pam, and I do interim executive leadership work. And these are all the right questions, right? This is all the right process. And what's fascinating to me is, like, when I go into organizations, these are the kinds of questions that I'll ask. And I inevitably get, when it's in the real world, right, I inevitably get a lot of pushback. Yeah, but our organization's different because, right? And so there's often some pushback from that. And I find that, like, these are the right questions, right? And this is the right tool. I'm curious though about, like, there's so much variability across centers and their staffing models and stuff. I'm wondering how big the sample size needs to be in order to draw the kind of generalizations that you might be drawing, or if maybe there's subsets, like if your organization is within this size, here's some generalizations. If your organization is that size, and I don't know quite how to break it down. But I am curious about the calculator tool being flexible enough to meet the needs of lots of different centers, and robust enough to capture the information that they need to make decision making. So that's just what pops up for me in your analysis.
Yeah, you triggered a thought too, even just adding a dimension of geography. What is the geographic reach of a particular center, as well as the closest MSA? And how might that affect both costs as well as volume of activity?
Those comments are very similar to what Rich shared in the chat. So I just wanted to highlight that regional competition and, like, how many other centers are in a certain radius. Francisco, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was also combine my comments, highlighting what we said, and at the same time to share very openly with all of you here that I am joining from Pendle Hill, and this is a center that has been running, a Quaker retreat center that has been running for the past 93 years almost. And I am in the midst of all of this, like when Ben announced about this sharing today, I said, I must be there, because, it's the constant question in front of us. How can we make our center sustainable, knowing that we have so many factors, some of them that we know very well, some of them that we don't have any clue. And we think that we have clue. that I found myself like, oh, I thought that I knew something about this, but with the pandemic, with what is going on, I found that there are new layers that I need to make myself familiar with. And listening to you all today, bring all of these with fresh energy. So I definitely, I am eager to continue learning and to see, how these can spark a deepest conversation about how can we support one another on this journey, and at the same time, I don't know, explore with creativity, including for centers that are very close to one another, how is that we can definitely work towards sustainability while recognizing our differences and recognizing the space for collaboration. And I will leave it there.
I know this is Joe Urjavik from the ARC Retreat Community in Stanfield, Minnesota. And I don't know how this, how our situation compares to other folks here on the call, but our community has been in operation for 45 years. You know, we have a let's say like almost 20 room lodge, you know, plus spaces for volunteers. One thing we run into, especially being an older organization, is a lot high maintenance costs. You know, we have an old heating system that works pretty well, but you know, we'll probably need replacing. We are on 90 acres, and like last year we had quite a few windstorms that knocked down a lot of trees. So we had a lot of costs incurred from having to, you know, managing not so much damage to our building, but just, managing the, fallen wood and things like that, and keeping the trails open for our guests who like to hike and that. But that's one thing I said we face, which I'm guessing that maybe our costs, not counting employee costs and things like that, might be a little bit higher just because of the age of our organization and the, age of our our main building too. So.
Because this is a Q&A, are there specific questions that you want to get answers from our student team to clarify anything that they've presented? I want to make sure we're clear before they go into more detail.
I have a question. I am curious to have a better understanding of the metrics that you found are the ones that are like we must to look at within your research.
Just to clarify, are you asking about like what types of financial costs we were looking at, or are you talking about like the performance metrics that we discussed?
Both.
Both. Okay. Well, I guess to talk on the performance metrics, so a few of us are in a degree called industrial engineering, where something that we end up needing to use is something called KPIs, which are performance indicators. And they kind of they assess how well the project is doing in terms of like, is it meeting the needs of the client? Is it meeting are improvements actually being made? So these are things that we've discussed in our coursework, such as like a big one is client satisfaction, because something that has been driven into us is that if we don't make something that the client is satisfied with or needs, then there's not really a point in making the product at all. So that's one of the big ones. Financial status is just something like, especially in a sustainability or in a cost analysis, the end goal really is to not lose money. So financial status being revenue greater than or equal to expenses is also just a big formula. Process improvement is a large part of our degree. So this is stuff like looking at, are you saving time? Is your accuracy increasing? Are you saving money? So is the process different from your current state? That's just a way to compare what it is like right now compared to what it would look like in the future. And then just in the case of the sustainability study, the amount of loss being reduced just makes sense to be like, okay, well, as long as if the loss is reduced, then you are being closer to being sustainable in terms of your financial models. And then I can also talk on the costs factors that we looked into, unless someone else wants to head that on the team. Okay, cool. Okay, yeah, it's fine. In terms of costs, that was actually really tough to start with, knowing that each center has its own really different model and how they run and what costs are important to them. So we started off with just looking at very like general, higher level, like very common things, like how much do you pay your staff and how much do you spend on feeding your guests and how much do you spend on housekeeping for your areas, and kind of built off of that to kind of find hopefully things that are just general enough that it would be, I guess, applicable to most centers, but also understanding that within each like general top category, there'll be a lot of variability between centers, which is what this analysis is really doing, is seeing if there really is a common denominator across that variability, And if there isn't, how do we account for that? And that's what we're currently studying in our data analysis after receiving all that data. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and then I can kind of touch upon some of the questions we're getting in the chat. So for like the one from Rachel Douglas, you're asking like if there's anything we could look at as a sample for where the revenues are greater than or equal to expenses. I'd say that's kind of what we're hoping the best practices manual will kind of express, right? It's from the retreat centers we've seen and where they are doing well, kind of what we can help other people understand, and kind of have that serve as kind of a sample of what's successful. And then for Leslie Ray, it would be very good to do like look at a technology / workflow analysis. But at least for this current study, probably can't touch upon that just because there is a finite amount of time and that does have to be very specific. But yeah.
That's just a wish list.
Yeah.
I can talk.
yeah,
I can touch on Rich's question. So, the 9.8% growth potential was found through a study through the Global Wellness Institute. It should be somewhere in that really tiny references list. I can also go find the link so it's easier for you to access it if that would be helpful for anybody. A thumbs up or a response in the chat would be probably best. Okay, yeah, I'll go find it.
Rich, I appreciate what you're saying about that it checks out with your center's experience. And I think that's part of this call too, is if there are pieces of this that don't check out with your center's experience, we'd like to know where those are so we can tailor it better.
I just want to say to the team, you've taken on a really difficult task, and I applaud that you've been able to kind of cut through and make some decisions about what you're going to pay attention to, because you just can't do everything. But that you're not running away screaming when you see how diverse every retreat center is an admirable thing. The one thing, and I know you may not be able to do it, but I was just curious when you said salaries and payroll was the highest cost, but that you had chosen to kind of just let that be. I'm not sure that I understand if that's not part of what you can look at, but I do think that for us as directors of retreat centers, because it is in most cases our highest cost, we really do need to be looking at different kinds of models. I know board members tend to always think that volunteers can magically do everything and you really don't need very much staff. But that might be something that we deal with in a separate cohort group. I think we've already been talking about looking at different staffing models, but I just applaud you for hanging in there. I think this is going to be great.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nancy, on the staffing models. I've been hearing a lot of that lately too. Board management, kind of skill sharing. There's lots of pieces where this study can kind of inform what RCC does next in terms of supporting centers.
Yeah, and I guess to cover the question in the chat about the, how many RCC members relying on philanthropic giving, fee for services, venue rentals, etc. I mean, we have the data for the centers that we've been, communicating with, but we don't have At least I don't believe so, unless Ben has information from RCC. I don't believe we have any overarching for every retreat center in the network. But I mean, we just off the top of my head, most of the centers that we have data from are getting do receive, you know, donations, grants, etc., that do cover a good chunk of their costs. Or yeah, cover their costs.
I will flag that question for when we structure the next RCC community survey, which happens every year or 18 months. Add that.
Yeah, we've been trying not to look too much on donations. As you know, we're kind of viewing them as more a what you do to cover your existing you know, what used to cover your costs, just because there's a lot of things you can change, but it's really hard to change what donations you're getting. It doesn't really help and be like, well, just get more donations. So yeah, you know, we have it in mind, but we're kind of viewing it as more a, you know, we'll tell you kind of where your gaps are in your operations, and then the donations can try to cover that a little bit more. Because yeah, the religious groups get more donations than non-religion groups and everything.
Yeah, especially when looking at like how to be consistently sustainable. If your donors aren't consistent, it won't be a thing that we can keep on relying on to maintain sustainability. So that's something that definitely we're looking into and keeping an eye on. I know someone has their hand up. So
I tried to follow along as good as I could on the PowerPoint presentation, but it went pretty fast. So I'd like to analyze it a little bit more probably on the recording. But did you add in there like energy cost? I didn't quite see that, and maybe it was labeled something different, but I mean, like all of our energy costs have gone through the roof. And that falls on us, that it's something that we can't magically make disappear anything in our budget. But was that in that I missed it, that it was in there? I saw some of the other maintenance stuff that you have to do, but I didn't necessarily see energy costs, which has risen greatly.
we did factor in utility costs and energy. It was not put in the slides, but it is something that we are making sure is being accounted for, and it's something we requested for.
Lots of good wisdom here. I like the chat. Are there, okay, there are more questions coming in. I'll be quiet.
Yeah, I guess that question in the chat, that is again one of the things we're hoping that will be covered in our best practices manual, you know, because it will just be a manual full of best practices, you know, like when we were having our discussions with the warden, you know, he was actually kind of phrasing the question in the terms of like, if you were, what would you tell people if they were creating a center, like what are the best practices that you would suggest to them? So that those kind of questions are definitely kind of exactly what we're searching to get at.
Did anyone have questions about the calculator tool? The form and structure of that? That was sort of our dream for what this study could output. And I was hesitant to like promise anything, but the students keep talking about it like this is going to happen. So I'm really hopeful that we can have something that is able to analyze all of our data individually in unique ways to help us highlight where the needs are. It feels like magic to me. That feels out of my ability to do, and I'm excited that seems to be within reach. If there aren't other questions at this point, I would encourage students, if you want to move into the next part of your presentation, go ahead.
Hopefully we will be able to have at least a prototype by our spring academic quarter, which would be, oh goodness, I think that's between April and June, which would hopefully at least be able to at least play with it. Honestly, we're hoping to maybe even be able to, well, this is very far-fetched, like it's a reach. In the May call, a huge reach goal would be to have a version that you could look at, but we also don't know what road bumps will hit along the way, so we don't want to promise it at this moment. But it's something we're aiming for at least. Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna go over this really quick overview. So something that we are utilizing, so as we presented the 3 different levels of sophistication for the tool, we will end up making only one of those most likely for this project. So we have to figure out which one we're going to use. So this process known as multi-criteria decision analysis is the approach that we're going to be taking to make this decision. It is a data-based approach to decision making, which is used to determine the best solution option. And this is done by identifying various types of criteria, either determined by the client user needs and priorities or from the person making the product. And I guess the easiest way to explain it is that it kind of compares each version to each other utilizing these criterion, and then eventually presents a ranking based off of the ranking of the priorities. So you would basically the steps are you would make a list of criterion, you will rank them based off of your needs and priorities, and then you will compare each solution to that ranking, and then eventually it will hopefully provide a best option. So next slide. So we wanted to open up this discussion to all of you. We came up with a few types of criteria for the true cost calculator tool that we thought would make most sense, but we wanted to have this discussion with you because of course we won't be the ones using it. It will be mostly the retreat center leaders and their staff. So we wanted to make sure that the criteria we are considering is on the right track. If there's something that we're missing or needs to be taken away, are these representative of your needs? So this is just a way for all of us to kind of be here together and discuss this together and come up with making sure that our ideas are meeting what you are expecting or need from us. And this is totally an open discussion. We can talk in the chat or out here. And then after this, we'll be sending out a survey to all of you to be able to actually rank the final criteria decision at the very end.
Anybody have other criteria that are not listed here that this seems pretty straightforward to me?
It does seem straightforward. I guess I'm curious, like how this would look in practice. Like if there's either like a hypothetical case study of how this might be used? Like, could you walk us through the steps? Or if it's based on another tool that's used in a different industry, that maybe inspired this, that you could walk us through how that tool might be used. Just to get a better sense of, the functionality of it. Because it seems pretty straightforward, and I'm just, and it's great to have a prototype to start piloting, because you don't know what it's missing sometimes until you actually put it in use and go, oh, we should have thought of this. Or now that we're using it, we realize we need, X, Y, and Z.
I guess like in a basic walkthrough, it's, since there's the 3 different levels, I guess for both the manual and the semi-automatic level, it would be basically a person would input all of their data, whether it's into the template or into the actual tool itself. And then they would hit a button that's like submit or upload, and then the tool itself, the tool will go through the data and kind of compare it to each other and calculate what the true costs of running the center or running a program would be, as well as highlighting the highest areas of revenue, highest areas of expense. And of course, the difference between your revenue and expense to see if you're making, losing, or breaking even in terms of the financial state of that program, the year, the month, whatever scope of what you're analyzing and putting into the tool. And then you'll be able to use that to then refer to either the best practices manual or look into other forms of income if that is something that you need to look into. In terms of the automatic tool, that one's going to be a little more tough, as it's doing this all automatically. It will look at purchases that you're making. It'll look at like bookings that are being made and actually being that end up occurring, because I know that sometimes cancellations do happen. So it would do that automatically, and you as a user would not input anything into the tool itself, and would instead output data to yourself that you can just kind of extract. That's something that we're still looking at how that would work, especially with like maintaining financial security and privacy with both your guests and yourself. But it's definitely that's the basic gist of it. And I see a few questions in the chat. How often do you manage? So for in terms of the manual and semi-automatic versions, that would be most likely a local tool that you would use on your own. It wouldn't be something that you would log into. You would just have the like basically either software or another tool that you would have locally on your computer or whatever system you're using at your center. The automatic tool, we were talking about the 9-digit identification code that would basically link you to the center that it would to the data it is taking automatically.
I'm new here, and my name is Whitney, and we're running here 45 years as well. So my question is with regards to the sustainability and the greening the center, like did you also input, like, when we change like from plastics to greening the center, so putting more stuff on the sustainability of the center, that costs a lot. And then the second one is like, did you also consider like the inflation, the recession, like everything is like freeze right now, but you still need to catch up with like to the roof expenses of like the food cost, like just to maintaining the overhead of the center. I'm not really sure if I get that right in the presentation as well.
Yeah, at the core of it, right, it is a problem because there are so many factors that we can't possibly control from all of them. I mean, if you were using, whatever proper statistical methods, the sample size would be huge, and obviously we don't have the time or anything to actually control for every variable. But we're trying to deal with as many questions as possible that we can. Yeah, because like you said, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, when we were like collecting our data, we tried to ask the participants of the study to give us data that are like most representative of the current state, so that when we do develop our model, we can apply our model to the representative state that can hopefully be used for, I guess, later in the future. So I guess for some of the centers that we receive data from, it's either from like the past year or the past 2 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jenna and Yumi's. That's like most representative of what's actually happening, and then we can like move forward with, I don't know, with, I guess, with a newer model that we can develop and that they can use using historical data from the past year, if that makes sense. So maybe it takes into account a little bit of recession and inflation, but I don't think it fully covers everything, because everything is, I don't know, very hard these days, and we do try to acknowledge that.
It's just like it's changing. And then sometimes like, you know, the new system can be like not be useful in like the current situation when we had COVID, right? So everything changed, the landscape changed with regards to how we offer our programmings, how we are also operating the center. It also changed. And so if we're not considering this cost as well, and not having the cost accounting, just very basic, how much is your lasagna, or like, you know, all these little details that adds up your cost, and then you're like not saying, are you even break even? That's really a good question right now, because we can't in a very small retreat centers, you don't have enough people to even just focus on the little details.
Students, do you want to speak to Francisco's question about deferred maintenance? I know we're looking at property upkeep in general, but deferred maintenance is a little different.
Yeah, it hasn't explicitly come up, but that is a very good question, right? Because yeah, it is a very different thing than just regular maintenance, but it is still a very big cost on the horizon. I think it's kind of come up peripherally with discussions with centers, but I don't think, as of right now, we don't have any concrete data on it. But it could maybe be added. We'll have to have a conversation about it, but we will definitely heard it, and we will try to get it in if we can.
Yeah, the calculation of maintenance due to facility age may be something we look into if it looks like there's a higher maintenance based off of the age of the center and their facility. I really like that idea.
Yeah, and then for the like common data resources and formats, yeah, we have seen for the most part, yeah, QuickBooks and Excel sheets are what we've seen the most. And yeah, some people do use also, yeah, the hotel style booking programs. But we haven't started like looked into that in terms of like best practices or anything. We haven't really looked at it in that sort of light.
Also spotting a question that I think we missed earlier from Sarah Lynn with the payroll question.
Also, if you need to reschedule or even move your appointment, please leave a comment on the
Okay, I did not understand the question if there was one. I'm sorry.
I'm in the middle of listening to a meeting.
Ratna, could you mute? I'm not able to mute.
All right.
There we go. Yeah, go ahead, Yumi.
Okay, sorry again, but the payroll question, why we were trying to exclude it from our data analysis. We were mostly expecting that it would be, we need to, I guess the train of thought with that was that we still need to pay employees and staff to do the work. So it was something that we were hesitant to touch and be like, hey, maybe lower your payroll, pay people less. It just didn't feel right, especially with like how the economy is right now. So if that is something you think that we should look more into, then of course we're open to it. But just at this moment, it was something we were hoping we can find a way to be sustainable without affecting the payroll of paying employees and staff.
Yeah, and then the question on the in-house versus outsourced in inclusion in the calculator tool, that is a very good point, and we will see if we can make that happen. So I guess, yeah, if nobody has any questions left, we can move on to the taking the survey part of the conversation. So we have a QR code, we have a URL for a bit.ly, so it should be easy to type in. And then also I am dropping a link in the chat to it as well. So whatever way works the best for you to take the survey, it is out there. And if you have any questions about like the wording or whatever, let us know.
Yeah, you would basically be rating each criterion from a scale of 1 to 10 of how much you would want that prioritized for your center. To clarify, I know that ease of implementation is basically how easy would it be for the model to be applied to your current method of keeping our financial bookings, like books documented. If you have other questions of the wording of the criteria, we'd be happy to answer any of those. And the question in the chat, we do have a category which is like platform or fees used to use softwares for reservations. Oh, and yes, 1 is the least, 10 is the most important, 1 is the least important.
For folks who are going to watch this community call video later on and are maybe seeing this on YouTube, how much input would you invite from them if they've got their phone out and they're watching this video and they want to follow this QR code? Is that fine for more responses?
I would say up to Friday, March 10th would be a good time because we'd probably end up starting the actual decision analysis that weekend.
Sweet.
I don't know when this will be posted, so I want to make sure there's a date set.
We don't know either, but that works for me. We will be saving the chat and including them in the notes for this call. So if you have some final questions that you want to share before being able to talk about them, feel free to drop some in the chat. But I think we are open to taking more questions verbally too, if you'd like.
Yeah, we also want to say thank you so much for participating and like discussing with us and taking our survey. It really means a lot.
Let's maybe stop the screen share for a minute and I can do some kind of closing remarks unless there's more you want to share. I don't want to step over you, but you've shared a lot. Thank you for your time and your willingness to do this work. I'm excited for our upcoming community calls. We have a couple booked in March. There's the slide deck for this presentation that you have in the chat, but we'll be sharing another report that the students have written in our newsletter coming out next month. Some quarterly calls are happening now for Midwest centers and for Catholic centers. So if you're part of a region or community or group that wants to meet with other retreat centers that are like yours, let us know. We can help facilitate that. And the video for this will be up within the next 3 days or so. So we'll let you know. You'll be able to pop back in and review some of this presentation later. We'll be presenting again on this. I believe it's May 23rd. Second community call in May. We'll have this team back. Jenna and Yumi and Alyza will be back, and we'll talk again about what they've learned between now and then. Am I missing anything else, Aaron? I thought I had another announcement.
I don't think so.
Nope.
I think you're good.
I think I'm good too. Any other questions for the students before we close out the call? It's a long chat. We're going to save that. Great. Great. Thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.